The trouble started the day I found a 6-foot wooden fence hammered straight across my horse trail like it was someone's backyard clothesline. I was halfway through saddling up Daisy, my old Appaloosa mare, when she snorted and stared off toward the ridge. That's when I saw it. Fresh lumber padlock and a bright red sign that read, "Private property HOA access only." I knew exactly who was behind it before I even turned around: Wendy Norridge, president of the Willow Creek Ranch Estates HOA. Mid-50s, pearl earrings in at all times, and a permanent look on her face like someone just spilled wine on her white carpet. She'd been gunning for my land since the day I bought the place 5 years ago. My house sits on the far edge of the development, technically still part of the original ranch acreage that predates the HOA by decades. I'd always kept to myself, maintained my fences, paid my dues, not that I agreed with them, and didn't bother anyone. But that wasn't good enough for Wendy. Mr. Ellison Lorne. I heard her voice before I saw her. I turned to see her marching up the gravel road in that stiff-shouldered way that made her look like she was allergic to being ignored. She had 2 clipboard-toting HOA lackeys trotting behind her like ducklings. "What's with the fence?" I asked, motioning to the monstrosity she'd planted across my riding trail. She sniffed. "That trail crosses into common HOA property, and after a board vote, we've decided to restrict access. Too much liability risk." "You'll need written approval from the board if you want to use it." I raised an eyebrow. "That trail's been in use since the 1940s. It's part of the original ranch easement. It's on my deed." Wendy gave the fakest laugh I've ever heard. "Well, we've reviewed the plats, and the HOA has jurisdiction. The board voted unanimously. It's not personal." Oh, but it was. She'd been trying to absorb my lot into the HOA's control for years, claiming I wasn't maintaining visual harmony because I had a red barn and a windmill. Last fall, she tried to fine me for having too many chickens. Now this fence. She was escalating. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just looked her square in the face and said, "You sure about that?" She tapped her clipboard. "Completely. The HOA lawyer confirmed it." I nodded. "All right then." What Wendy didn't know, and what was about to blow up in her face, was that I had something better than a lawyer. I had the original land deed, not some photocopy, not a county plat map. The actual notarized document from 1951, when old man Hartley sold the Eastern Ranch parcel mine to a private citizen with full access rights to the Ridge Trail. The HOA wasn't even a twinkle in anyone's eye back then, so I went back inside, pulled the deed out of my safe, and made a few calls. Not to a lawyer yet, but to the county land records office. I emailed them a scanned copy just to make sure my memory was right. It was. My parcel, including the trail, was never legally incorporated into the HOA boundaries. It had been grandfathered out. Which meant Wendy Norridge had just fenced off land she didn't own, and that was trespassing. The kind of trespassing you can get arrested for. I waited exactly 3 days. Not out of hesitation, but because I wanted the paper trail to stack up long enough to matter. In that time, Wendy sent me 2 certified letters, one threatening fines for unauthorized trail use, and another stating that my livestock permit was under administrative review. Both arrived in glossy envelopes with the HOA seal embossed in gold foil, as if that made them more legal. I didn't reply to either. Instead, I spent those days at the county recorder's office and the assessor's department, digging through old parcel logs. I even found a microfiche machine, which I hadn't touched since high school history class, and pulled up a zoning ordinance from 1973 that explicitly exempted legacy ranch land from any future developer's jurisdiction unless the owner signed annexation paperwork. I hadn't. No one before me had either. That was the nail. By the 4th morning, I had a manila folder 2 inches thick, complete with stamped affidavits, surveyor maps, and a certified copy of the original easement agreement signed by Judge Hollister himself back in '51. That name still meant something around these parts. I'd also made a quiet visit to my neighbor, Amelia Ruiz. She ran a riding school on the next parcel over and had used that same trail for over 15 years. Turns out Wendy had sent her a similar letter, demanding she reroute her students to a designated HOA-approved loop that didn't even connect to her property. Amelia had refused. Smart woman. I've got the deed, I told her. The real one. I just need witnesses who have seen that trail in use before the HOA ever existed. She didn't even hesitate. I'll bring my whole class if you need it. That afternoon, I filed a formal trespassing complaint with the sheriff's department. Deputy Haverson took one look at the folder I handed him and let out a slow whistle. You know this is enough to press charges, right? He asked. She had no legal authority to build that fence. I know, he nodded toward the door. I'll come out tomorrow. You want to be there. I wouldn't miss it. I spent the rest of the day checking the trail cameras I'd installed last month. I found 3 separate instances of HOA board members walking the ridge, measuring distances, and marking trees with orange tape all before the fence went up. One video even showed Wendy unlocking the padlock with a key she wore on a lanyard. That was important. That made it premeditated. The next morning, I saddled Daisy just as Deputy Haverson's cruiser pulled into the gravel. He stepped out, adjusted his belt, and gave me a nod. You ready to see some sparks fly? We walked the trail together up to the wooden barricade. I'd left it untouched, even though every day it stayed up made my blood boil. He inspected the padlock, took a few photos, then radioed dispatch to confirm the property lines. The GIS overlay matched everything in my folder. That's when Wendy showed up in a visor and tennis shoes, like she'd just come back from micromanaging someone's flower beds. She stopped when she saw Haverson, her smile tight and performative. Deputy, what a surprise. Is there a problem? He pointed at the fence. You build this, she hesitated. The HOA approved it. It's a safety measure. Liability is, you built this on land that doesn't belong to the HOA, he interrupted. This parcel is recorded as private, exempt land under the 1951 deed. You've got no jurisdiction here. Her mouth opened, then closed. That can't be right, our attorney said. Your attorney doesn't override recorded law, he said. And unless you can produce a court order or signed annexation agreement, which we've verified does not exist, this structure is trespassing. Criminal trespassing. She blinked twice. Are you serious? I am, he said. And I'm going to need you to remove the fence immediately. If it's not gone within 72 hours, we'll have it dismantled and impounded as evidence. Her hands clenched at her sides. You're siding with him. I'm siding with the law. Wendy, ever stubborn, turned on her heel and stormed off without another word. Haverson shook his head and muttered, they always think they're in charge until the paperwork shows up. Over the next 2 days, I watched from my porch as a landscaping crew, clearly hired in haste, came to take down the fence. They worked in silence, their expressions unreadable. Probably didn't know they were undoing a power play gone wrong. I made sure to record the whole thing, not to gloat just in case it ever went to court, which it did. 3 weeks later, I received a summons. But not from Wendy, from the county district attorney. Apparently, my complaint had triggered a deeper investigation, and once they started poking around, they found something worse. The HOA had been collecting special assessment fees for trail maintenance on parcels they didn't legally own, mine included. Over 30 homeowners had been charged for upkeep on land that was never under the HOA's control. That meant fraud, and not the kind you can cover up with a memo. I was asked to testify, along with Amelia and 2 other residents who'd received similar letters. When we showed up at the hearing, Wendy looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her lawyer, a young guy with nervous eyes, tried to argue that the HOA had acted in good faith, but the judge wasn't buying it. The law doesn't care about faith, she said. It cares about documentation, and Mr. Lorne has it. Wendy was ordered to pay restitution to every resident who had been improperly charged. The HOA was fined for unauthorized construction and issued a cease and desist from making any further claims over non-HOA land. But the real blow came when the judge referred the case to the state's regulatory board for nonprofit governance with a recommendation for a full audit. That night, Amelia dropped off a bottle of bourbon with a ribbon on it. Trail's open, she said, raising her glass. And so is the can of worms. She wasn't wrong. Over the next month, 3 board members resigned, 1 moved out of state. A 4th tried to run for HOA president. But nobody would vote for him after the audit revealed he'd signed off on inflated contractor invoices, ones that just happened to trace back to his cousin's landscaping company. The new board, made up of folks who actually lived on the edge lots, voted to amend the bylaws so that no future president could authorize construction without a 2/3 majority and a recorded survey. As for Wendy, she disappeared from public view. Word was she'd been quietly removed from the board and threatened with civil litigation if she tried to interfere again. I never heard from her after that, but one morning, as I rode Daisy along the ridge just past the spot where the fence had stood, I found a single red sign lying in the brush. The wind had warped it, and the lettering had peeled, but you could still make out the words, "Private property HOA access only." I picked it up, strapped it to the saddle, and brought it home. It hangs in my barn now, next to the deed, a reminder that paper beats power every time. 3 weeks after the court ruling, the storm hadn't passed, it had just shifted direction. By then, the HOA board had been gutted, the audit was underway, and Wendy was nowhere to be seen. But something about the silence itched at me. You can feel it when someone's not done causing trouble, they just go quiet long enough to work in the shadows. And sure enough, that silence cracked when I got a visit from a man in a navy blue jacket with a clipboard and a badge clipped to the lapel. He introduced himself as Investigator Rowan, attached to the State Inspector General's office. Not local, not county, state level. That meant something serious had landed on his desk. "I'm following up on irregularities in the Willow Creek Ranch Estates HOA's financial disclosures," he said, scanning the barn and the ridge beyond. "You were listed as a complainant in the trespassing case. Mind if I ask you a few questions?" I motioned to the porch. "Let me guess." The audit didn't just find bad math. He sat down, opened his folder, and laid out a page showing a bank statement not redacted. One line stood out, a transfer of $42,000 labeled Ridge Trail Beautification Project. "That's the fence," I said. "That's what we thought." But the contractor linked to that payment never filed a permit. Doesn't even have a license listed with the state. "Can you confirm whether any construction equipment or crew were on the property before the fence appeared?" I nodded. "I've got trail cam footage of them hauling lumber in the week prior. They worked fast, looked like they were trying to beat a deadline." He tapped the folder. "We've got a bigger issue. That account, it's not the HOA's primary fund. It's a secondary pool, unauthorized, off books. We believe it was established by board members using post-dated checks from annual dues. It wasn't just the fence. They were moving money through dummy vendors and pocketing the difference." I leaned back, absorbing that. "So it wasn't just power plays, they were skimming." "Exactly. And we think Mrs. Norridge was orchestrating it. The signatures match hers on the withdrawal forms." I went inside, grabbed a flash drive with all my trail cam footage, and handed it over. "You'll find her on here the day the fence went up. She had the only key to the padlock." Rowan pocketed it. "That'll help. We've got a subpoena incoming. If this connects to embezzlement, it crosses into felony territory." Within days, unmarked sedans started appearing around the neighborhood, not patrol cars, state enforcement plainclothes types. They weren't subtle. I saw one parked behind the community pool house, watching the clubhouse where the HOA stored their records. Another stood across the street from Wendy's place, engine running. Then came the day they moved in. It was a Wednesday morning, early, sun just barely warming the gravel. I was feeding Daisy when I heard the crunch of tires. 4 cruisers, 2 unmarked units, and a mobile evidence van rolled into Willow Creek like a parade with no music. They didn't knock on Wendy's door. They went in with a warrant. I stayed by the fence, watching what looked like 3 detectives carry out boxes of binders, laptops, and a desktop tower. Someone rolled in a dolly with bankers' boxes stacked to the brim. Rowan stepped out of the van, caught my eye, and gave a single nod before disappearing inside. Later that day, news broke on the local station. Not the kind of story they bury in the weather segment either, it was front-page material. State investigators raid HOA in alleged fraud and misuse of funds. They named Wendy. They showed her house. They even mentioned the original trespassing incident as the spark that lit the fuse. That night, My neighbor across the ridge, Nolan, retired firefighter, sharp as a tack, walked over with a stack of old newsletters. "I thought you might want to see these," he said. "They've been doctoring meeting minutes for years. See this one from last spring. Says the board unanimously approved a trail improvement project with community feedback. I was at that meeting. No such item ever came up." I flipped through them. Different fonts, inconsistent formatting. Sloppy but deliberate. "You think they were forging records?" I asked. "I think they were rewriting history." I scanned a few more. They'd retrofitted entire projects, gazebo repairs, ornamental lighting upgrades, even a supposed security camera installation that no one had ever seen. All listed as community-funded, none with transparent bids or contractor names. But then we found the big one. A newsletter from 2 summers ago referencing a land acquisition initiative to reclaim and repurpose easement spaces for HOA benefit. That was the smoking gun. They'd written the plan to seize my trail right into one of their newsletters, tucked between a bake sale announcement and a pool closure notice, like no one would notice. They thought if they printed it, it made it real. I handed it off to Rowan the next day. He didn't hide his reaction. "This helps a lot," he said. "We're pushing for a full forensic audit now. If we can prove intent to defraud, it won't just be fines. It'll be time behind bars." Meanwhile, the neighborhood started waking up. People who had kept their heads down during Wendy's reign were now speaking out publicly. A group of homeowners organized a town forum in the park, complete with folding chairs and a portable mic. They asked me to speak. I didn't want to at first. I wasn't a politician. But I knew what they really needed was someone to say what they were all already thinking, that they'd been bullied, lied to, and robbed, and that it was okay to fight back. So I stood up under the summer sun, looked out at the crowd, maybe 60 people, and told them how the Ridge Trail had been part of this land long before the HOA existed, how a red sign and a padlock didn't overrule a deed, and how silence only helps the wrong people stay in control. Amelia stood next and read a letter from a former board member who'd quit after being pressured to sign off on trail assessments she didn't understand. Nolan brought up the falsified newsletters. And by the end of the meeting, the crowd had voted unanimously to petition for a full reorganization of the HOA charter. 2 weeks later, state charges were filed against Wendy. Wire fraud, misuse of nonprofit funds, unauthorized disbursement of assessments, and obstruction of an audit. Her bail hearing was short. She wasn't granted release, but the story didn't end with her in handcuffs. It ended at the next HOA election, where the entire board was replaced, including the treasurer and secretary who had signed off on the extra account. The new president, a quiet woman named Teresa, who ran a native plant nursery out of her garage. Her first act in office was to establish an open records policy and a requirement for third-party audits every year. She also personally delivered a letter to me, apologizing on behalf of the neighborhood and confirming that my property would never again be subject to HOA interference. It wasn't notarized, it was handwritten, and signed by every single homeowner on the street. The Ridge Trail is clear now, no fences, no signs, no padlocks, just the way it's supposed to be. Some mornings I ride it with Amelia and her students. Other times I go alone, Daisy walking slow as the sun rises behind us, peaceful, honest. Wendy thought she could rewrite boundaries with a hammer and a vote. Turns out, some lines can't be moved. A month after the HOA board was replaced, and the charges against Wendy had started winding their way through the court system, I thought the chapter had closed. The trail was open, the neighborhood was healing, and the new board was focused on transparency instead of control. I'd even started helping Amelia sketch plans for a shared riding loop that would connect our properties through the eastern tree line, a project that, for once, had the enthusiastic blessing of the community. Then the county assessor's office called. A clerk named Margot, who'd helped me during my initial land deed research, left a message asking me to come in to review an irregular filing. No details, just a quiet urgency in her voice. When I arrived, she met me at the front counter with a folder already in hand. "A quitclaim deed was filed 2 weeks ago," she said, flipping it open. It purports to transfer your Ridge Trail to the HOA. Only problem is it's not signed by you or any previous legal owner. She turned the page, my jaw clenched. The signature at the bottom was a shaky imitation of mine, close enough to fool someone who didn't know better, but not close enough to survive scrutiny. And the notarization, a stamp from a notary who died 3 years ago. I recognized the name only because she used to volunteer at the county fair. "Where did this come from?" I asked. Margot glanced around and lowered her voice. "Dropped off in person, no return address. It was attached to a packet of HOA filings. You're saying someone forged a deed to my land and tried to record it like it was real?" She nodded once. "We flagged it immediately. It never made it into the public record, but I thought you'd want to know." I left her office with the folder under my arm and a quiet fury building behind my ribs. The fence was one thing: physical, visible, and ultimately reversible, but forging a property transfer. That wasn't just overreach. That was a felony. I went straight to Investigator Rowan. He met me in a conference room at the district attorney's office, this time with a second agent from the State Land Fraud Division. Neither of them looked surprised. "We were hoping you'd bring this in," Rowan said, taking the forged deed from me. "We've been tracking patterns of document tampering tied to Willow Creek's old board. This makes our case stronger." The other investigator, a woman named Detective Gentry, leaned forward. "Did you authorize anyone to act as your agent or sign on your behalf for any property transfers in the last 12 months? "No one," I said. "And that notary stamp? The woman passed away. I helped organize her memorial," Gentry nodded. "That'll help establish intent to defraud. If we can prove this was part of a coordinated effort to fabricate ownership, we can escalate charges." They sent technicians to my property later that afternoon to scan every document I had, including the original deed. I handed it over without hesitation. If someone had gone this far, it meant they hadn't let go. And that meant something worse was probably coming. I didn't have to wait long. Just 3 nights later, I was woken by Daisy's frantic whinnying. It wasn't the usual restless shuffle of a horse startled by a raccoon. This was full panic, the sound of a creature that smelled danger. I threw on boots and grabbed the floodlight switch by my front door. The barnyard lit up in a white wash, and what I saw made my stomach drop. My barn's side door had been pried partly open, not kicked and worked open with a crowbar. The padlock lay in the dirt, twisted and useless. Next to it, a set of muddy bootprints led straight inside. I drew my old lever action .3030 from the wall rack and moved fast, calling out as I approached. No response. Inside, feed bags were slashed open. Tack racks had been overturned. Whoever it was hadn't stolen anything, they'd just trashed the place. Except for one thing. The wall where I kept the old deed and the HOA access-only sign both were gone. I called it in immediately. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes, and a forensics team followed soon after. Havorson, the same deputy who'd handled the fence incident, walked the barn with me, flashlight sweeping across the mess. "They didn't come for valuables," he muttered. "They came to erase records. They knew exactly what to take," I said. That deed was the nail in the coffin for the HOA's land claims. The next morning, Rowan and Gentry arrived again, this time with a burglary warrant and a request for a formal statement. They were already moving to issue subpoenas for the remaining members of the old board, all of whom had mysteriously stopped answering calls. Rowan didn't waste time. "We've linked the forged deed to a print found on the filing envelope. Belongs to your former HOA treasurer Earl Sims. The one who signed off on the special assessment accounts. Same guy. He's gone underground, moved out last week, left no forwarding address. But the break came 2 days later when a traffic stop in Phoenix turned up Earl's SUV. In the back seat, officers found the missing sign and the deed, still in its plastic sleeve, stuffed between 2 seat cushions. He was arrested on the spot and extradited back to the county under questioning. Earl cracked wide open. He confessed to the forgery, the break-in, and the attempt to bury the deed, but more importantly, he implicated Wendy. "She told me we had to fix the record," he said in his deposition. "Said if that deed stayed on file, the whole land deal would collapse. Said we had to make it disappear." That was the final straw. Wendy, already facing charges for fraud and misuse of funds, was now slapped with conspiracy to commit forgery, destruction of evidence, and orchestrating a criminal enterprise. Her trial began 6 weeks later, and the courtroom was packed to the walls not just with reporters, but with Willow Creek residents who'd finally come to see the full truth uncovered. The prosecution didn't hold back. They laid out the HOA's pattern of abuse: fabricated fines, unauthorized assessments, falsified newsletters, forged deeds, and a culture of manufactured authority. They showed the jury the forged document, played the deposition video of Earl unraveling under pressure, presented the recovered deed and the original easement maps. Wendy's defense tried to claim she'd been misled by board members and had no knowledge of the forgery. That fell apart the moment Rowan brought out an email chain recovered from her hard drive one where she explicitly directed Earl to neutralize the trail document before the audit exposes it. It took the jury 4 hours to return a verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance in public corruption cases, didn't mince words during sentencing. You used a position of trust to rewrite geography, weaponize bureaucracy, and deceive your neighbors for personal gain. You didn't just cross a line. You tried to erase it. Wendy was sentenced to 11 years in state prison, with restitution owed to every homeowner affected by the fraudulent assessments. Earl received 5, with a reduced sentence for cooperation. In the weeks after the trial, the neighborhood changed. The new board passed a resolution dissolving all previous easement-related disputes and formally recognized the original land boundaries. A community committee was formed to review every past fine and overturn those issued without due process. Amelia's riding school expanded into the newly restored greenbelt behind her property, and I helped her build a proper trailhead. Teresa, the new HOA president, came by one afternoon with a copy of a new charter amendment. "We've added a clause," she said. "No future board can claim jurisdiction over any property not explicitly listed in the founding documents, and any legal changes must be approved by 75% of residents and verified by an independent land attorney." I signed it with a steady hand. The Ridge Trail is more than just dirt and hoofprints now. It's become a symbol of what happens when people stand up, when lies are dragged into daylight, and when the law still means something. Some evenings, I still find that old red sign leaning against the barn wall. The paint's chipped, the wood's cracked, but I keep it as a reminder, not of what they tried to do, but of what they failed to take.